The story of Houston, of course, is that we've been doing a survey now for 32 years. This is the 32nd year where even as we speak, the data are being collected and they'll be released in a major event in April. And the story is that Houston went into major recession with the collapse of the oil boom in 1982, the worst regional recession of any part of the country at any time since World War II, and then recovered into a restructured economy and a demographic revolution. The restructured economy just very quickly has meant growing inequalities because we're in a global economy. Companies can produce goods anywhere, sell them everywhere. If you're doing a job that I can train a third world worker to do, if you're doing a job that I can program a computer to do, that's what I'm going to do. And the result is more and more inequality in Houston and America, predicated above all else on access to quality education. Education is now the critical determinant of a person's ability to earn enough money to support a family. And then secondly, Houston's future and its success depends on becoming a place that nurtures and attracts and retains the best and the brightest people in America. The resource of the knowledge economy is housed between the ears of the best and the brightest people in America who can live anywhere. And suddenly quality of life issues are never important. Who cares if it's ugly and if it smells? It's a smell of money, come on down. Suddenly quality of life issues have become central to Houston's prospects for success in the 21st century. And we're watching the city reinvent itself. And one example is the venue we're meeting in now. This is becoming a much more beautiful and attractive place every year as we watch this city reposition itself for success in the 21st century. And the other, of course, fundamental shift is in the nature of the Houston, the Texas, and the American ethnic population. So very quickly, why here, why now? Well, between 1492 and 1965, 82% of all the human beings on the face of this planet who came to American shores came from Europe. Another 12% were Africans originally brought here as slaves to serve the Europeans. There was a handful of Chinese and Japanese working as farmers and laborers in California and Hawaii. This nation was an amalgam of European nationalities, deliberately so. We were operating under the last 40 years of that period under one of the most viciously racist laws the US Congress ever passed, the National Origins Quota Act. And it came out of the great anti-immigrant racist backlash that accompanied the last great wave of immigration when 15.9 million immigrants came to America between 1890 and 1914. Here's a picture of the number of immigrants coming in each of the decades from the 1820s to the 2000s. Here we were British subjects. And then in the 1840s came this terrible disaster. Anybody remember what happened then? 1840s, a country in Europe where 1 million people died, 1 million immigrated, 2 million were left. Potato famine. I need not remind you what we thought of the Irish, right? And then came some Italians and some French and some Germans and some French, and then a little dip with the Civil War, another big dip with the recession of 1897. 15.9 million immigrants pouring into America, coming from Europe, but not coming from where real Americans were supposed to come. Northern Europe, they were coming from Southern and Eastern Europe, and they weren't Protestants, they were Catholics and Jews, and they had no history of democracy. They're coming to take our jobs and destroy our country. We've got to stop them. And in 1924, Congress enacted this incredible act that said, all right, from now on, you can come to this country in direct proportion to which your ethnicity and nationality was represented in the census of 1890 to give major preference to Northern Europeans. We used the new science of psychology and the IQ test to declare in the act, science has proven that there are 3 subspecies of the white race. The Nordics, who are biologically and intellectually superior to the Alpines, who in turn are superior to the Mediterraneans, and all of them are superior to the Jews and the Asians. And the law codified the Chinese Exclusion Act in California of 1882, the Gentleman's Agreement with Japan of 1906, to declare in the act, Asians are an inferior subspecies of humanity, ineligible from ever becoming American citizens. And Asians were banned entirely from coming to America. Isn't that incredible? This is us speaking out of the racist world of the 20s, 30s, 40s. You can see what happened to immigration. It plummeted. This is, of course, the Great Depression. Tell people you really want to stop immigration, engineer Great Depression, right? But mainly immigration seemed to be a thing of the past. 98% of all the immigrants who came here after the law was changed in 1924 came from Europe, 88% from Northern Europe, just as the act intended. The law obviously could not survive the shifts of consciousness with the civil rights movements the competition with the Soviet Union for the hearts and minds of third world countries, and above all, Kennedy's assassination, who wrote this powerful book about immigrant America and celebrated immigration. Kennedy's assassination, and in 1965, Congress changed the law. They said, well, we used to be a racist nation. We're not racist anymore. We're going to give every country recognized by the UN 20,000 visas a year, regardless of their ethnicity or nationality, so get off my back, we're not racist. But we'll continue the hallmark of American immigration policy, which is family reunification. If you're the father, mother, sister, brother, son, or daughter of an American citizen, you can come to the head of the line. Therefore, said Congress, not to worry. We're going to give preference to people who are related to those who are already here. Nothing will change, but we're just going to get rid of this racist law that has been on the books for so many years. Then it added another provision, since Congress was dealing with laws, that said, well, if you're a professional of exceptional ability, or if you have skills that are demonstrably needed in a short supply, you too can come to the head of the line. And Congress, in its debates in the 50s, was saying, we need to open the door for some more British doctors, some more German engineers. It never occurred to anyone that there were going to be African doctors, Indian engineers, Chinese computer programmers who would be able for the first time in the 20th century to come to America. The law was changed in 1965. It's been called one of the great inadvertent acts that the U.S. Congress has ever passed, in a body, of course, known for its inadvertent acts and its unintended consequences. The world changed. During the 1960s, about 3.5 million immigrants came. Only 38% were from Europe. 1970s, about 5 million came. Only 18% were Europeans. 1980s, about 9 million came. 1990s, about 11.5 million in the last decade. 88% of all the immigration coming to America since the law was changed in 1965 is coming from Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Caribbean. And the United States, that throughout all of our history had been an amalgam of European nationalities, is becoming a microcosm of the world. The first nation in history that can say, we are a free people, and we come from everywhere. And it's a remarkable change happening at the same moment as the American economy is becoming fully integrated, a single global world economic system. America, a microcosm of the world. Immigration is network driven, so you go where you know people. And there are two cities. See if I can make this work here. Two cities, Los Angeles and New York, that are the great immigration capitals of America. Still today, about 1/3 of all the foreign-born residents of the United States live in or around those two great cities, Los Angeles and New York, followed by lesser magnet gateway cities, Miami, San Francisco, Chicago, Houston, followed right after Houston by Washington, D.C., San Diego, Dallas, Boston, Atlanta, spreading to every city and town across America. No city has been transformed as fully, as completely, as suddenly, as irreversibly as Houston, Texas. Here is a powerful picture from the census of the last 6 decades, right? Here was our biracial world. Houston, throughout all of our history, was a biracial southern city dominated and controlled in an automatic, taken for granted way by white men. And in the space of the last 30 years has become the single most ethnically diverse major metropolitan area in the country. Here's our biracial world. In 1960, there were 1.2 million people living in Harris County, Texas. 74% of us were Anglos, 20% African Americans, 6% Hispanics, less than 1/2% were Asians. During the oil boom years of the 60s and 70s, it was Anglos pouring into Houston because this is where the jobs were. By 1980, Houston became the 4th largest city in America. Still an overwhelmingly Anglo city, 63% Anglo, 20% African American, now 16% Hispanic, 2% Asian. The Anglo population during the oil boom years of the 70s grew by 28%. Then came the oil bust. And between 1980 and 1990, the Anglo population grew by 1%. Between 1990 and 2000, the Anglo population of Harris County actually dropped by 6.3%. It dropped again by 5.2%. Meanwhile, the African American population grew by fueled by African immigration, fueled by the return of middle-class African Americans from northern cities to southern cities, Atlanta first, Houston second. The African American population grew by about 20% per decade, keeping pace with the overall population. Latino population grew by 74% in the 90s and by 43% in the 2000s. The Asian population grew even faster by 76% and by 49%. And by 2010, Harris County is now 41% Latino, 33% Anglo, 18% African American, 8% Asian. by that measure, this is the most ethnically diverse major city in the country. We beat out New York in terms of coming as close as you can to having equal representation among the four great communities of America. There are very few Asians in Miami. There are very few Hispanics in San Francisco. There are very few African Americans in Los Angeles. This is where the four communities meet. In greater balance, greater equality, all of us minorities, all of us called on to build something new under the sun, a truly successful, inclusive, equitable, united, multi-ethnic society that will be Houston and Texas and America in the 21st century. The census announced that by 2040 to 2045, the entire population of the United States that has been throughout all of our history an amalgam of European nationalities, by 2040 to 2045, the majority of Americans across the entire country will trace their ancestry to somewhere else on this planet than to Europe. And so what I tell people is, whoa, the American future is here in Houston now. How we navigate this transition will have enormous significance, not just for the Houston future, but for the American future. This is where the American future is going to be worked out. And one other key point before I leave this very quickly, just think where we would have been had Houston not been one of the great magnets for the new immigration of the last 30 years. Houston would have lost population. We would have had the same fate as other major American cities across the country that are losing their status as major cities. Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, St. Louis, Detroit, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Buffalo. Instead, Houston is one of the most vibrant, rapidly growing cities in America with a tremendous entrepreneurial spirit. Last city to go into recession, the first one to come out. One of the greatest economies in the country purely because of the tremendous energy, vitality, commitment to hard work of immigrants pouring into this city from Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Caribbean. No city has benefited more from immigration than Houston, Texas. And it's ironic, but not surprising to find anti-immigrant attitudes in Houston as elsewhere when you think just what a different story we would be telling about Houston had we been like Philadelphia, a great city that for one reason or another never attracted immigrants the way Houston has. So it's an important thing to remember, and it's a big part, I think, of the tremendous advantage that immigration has brought to Houston. And here is the single most ethnically diverse county in the world, we think. Fort Bend County today is 19% Asian, 24% Latino, 21% African American, 36% Anglo. You can't get much closer to 25, 25, 25, 25 than that. And it's a reminder of what's happening across the board. This is Montgomery County, the most Anglo of our surrounding counties. Was 81% Anglo in 2000, added a bunch of Anglos, and is now 71% Anglo because it added non-Anglos even faster. The demographic transformation, this incredible revolution is occurring everywhere. And here is a picture of Harris County in 1980, and in red, I blew on my cover here, wait a minute. I'm not supposed to see that yet, okay. 1980. This is in red are the census tracts that were predominantly Anglo, right, in Harris County. In black there's a third ward and the fifth ward. The census tracts that were predominantly African American. Here is a segundo barrio, predominantly Latino, along the ship channel. And then a very few places in 1980 where there was no majority in yellow. Okay, so that's Harris County in 1980. Here is Harris County in 1990. You can see the Latino population spreading north and east. Now the inner city surrounded by census tracts that have no majority now, but still a very red county overall. Here it is in 2000, and here it is today. Isn't that incredible? Houston's destiny, whether we would have chosen it or not, is to be the most ethnically diverse city in America, to be at the forefront of building the new America of the 21st century. And it's a truly remarkable thing. It is the hallmark of who we are. It's sort of the cards that this generation has been dealt. No one planned necessarily for this transformation to occur. Here it is. How do we make this work? How do we navigate this? How do we celebrate what is the extraordinary advantages that this brings? That's the great question for Houston as we go forward. And it's not only numbers, of course, it's also ages. We're living longer, healthier lives than human beings have ever lived in the history of human life on this planet. Doctors would tell you that age 65 in 1965 is the equivalent of age 73 today. You reach 65 today in good health, you have a quarter of your life ahead of you. Sociologists talk about the young old. You don't get to be old now until your late 80s or early 90s. We chose 65 as the time. When you were older, we were supposed to retire in 1906. And 7% of Americans live to the age of 65. And we say, well, my gosh, you make it to 65, you deserve to be taken care of by the rest of us. So those couple of months you have to go fishing or to sit on your porch. It's an incredible expansion of life. What do they say? 65 is the old 45, 45 is the old 25, 25 is the old 10. Right? I tell my students, you graduate from Rice at the age of 21, you have 60 years of vigorous adult life ahead of you. What are you going to do with those 60 years? And the old idea that I grew up with, the one life, one career imperative. I'm going to decide what I'm going to do at the age of 21, I'm going to do that nonstop, full-time until I'm 65, and then retire with a pension. Not the 21st century. Sociologists think the average college graduate will have 4 to 5 fundamentally different career changes before he or she retires. It's an extraordinary new world out there, but what is striking for our point of view demographically is that it is Anglos who are overwhelmingly, disproportionately overrepresented among the senior folk in America because they were the ones who've been born here in the 20s and 30s and early 40s, and we have not seen anything yet. The incredible period after World War II, when the rising tide lifted all boats, when America was the sole economic power on the planet, when the average American man, whatever his job, literally doubled his income between 1950 and 1970, making more money every year. And those were the years when we celebrated the stay-at-home housewife mother in suburbia. The average American woman gave birth to 3.6 children, and the baby boom was launched upon the land, preceded and followed by baby bust generations. So for 60 years, it's been this bulge going through the system. Demographers talk about it like a pig being swallowed by a python. Not very healthy either for the pig or the python. The leading edge of those 76 million babies turned 66 this year. And we're going to watch a literal doubling in the number of Americans over the age of 65 in the next 25 years. The fastest growing age segment of American population today is already now 85 years older and older. Our politics are going to be preoccupied, as it already is beginning to be, with Social Security and Medicare and access to Botox. You can sort of see it all coming. It is Anglos who are overwhelmingly, disproportionately overrepresented among that baby boom generation because they were the ones who've been born here between 1946 and 1964. It was not until 1965, after the baby boom basically ended, that non-Europeans were allowed in any meaningful numbers to come to America. So the young people across America are disproportionately non-Anglos. The older folks are disproportionately Anglo. Nowhere is that clearer than Houston. Houston is, this is, here we are, of everybody living in Harris County, Texas in 2010 census who were 65 years old or older, 57% were Anglos, 19% African Americans, 19% Latinos, 17% African Americans, 7% Asian. Here's the baby boom, ages 47 to 64, and then as you get younger, the proportion of Anglos plummets, the proportions of Latinos surges. You reach the children of Houston under the age of 18 across all of Harris County. Over half are Latino kids, and less than a quarter are Anglos. So one of the things you can say with absolute confidence is that no force in the world is going to stop Houston or Texas or America from becoming more Latino, more African American, more Asian, and less Anglo as the 21st century unfolds. Nothing in the world can stop that. And the only question then for our generation is, how do we make this work? How do we draw on this extraordinary sort of gift, but also challenge that we've been given to build a truly successful multi-ethnic society that will be Houston and will be all of America as the 21st century unfolds? And there's a big difference by educational attainment. One group of immigrants, largely Asian, are coming with extraordinary credentials. 57%, 59% of all, this is less than high school degrees, some college degree, postgraduate education. 59% of all Asian immigrants have college degrees compared to just 37% of Anglos. Asians are coming here, and the group with the highest levels of education of any group of Asians are the African immigrants. Largely Nigerians, largely London-trained doctors and engineers. Why are Asians and Africans coming with such extraordinary credentials? Because the main mechanism, once the law was changed in 1965 to get here, was family reunification, and there was no one for any African or Asian to family reunify with. They had been banned for the entire 20th century from coming to America. The only way you could get here was to qualify as a professional of exceptional abilities, in the case of Indian doctors or Chinese engineers, or as in the case of the Filipino nurses, having skills that were demonstrably needed in short supply, or as in the case of the Vietnamese qualifying for refugee status. And here is, I got it, yeah. Here is a reminder of the great variety among the Asian communities. This is, Filipinos have overwhelmingly likely to have college degrees, but less likely to have postgraduate degrees beyond the 4 years of college than either the Indians or the Chinese. And the Vietnamese who came as refugees came in several waves. The first wave were the elite working with the American-backed armies and regimes of Vietnam, and then came in the 1980s the largest refugee resettlement program in American history that brought Vietnamese boat people and the survivors of the killing fields of Cambodia. And so you get much more variety. I remind people, many Asians, especially many Vietnamese, are facing serious challenges in this city, unlikely to receive help in a language they can understand from a community that thinks all the Asians are doing great. So it's an important reminder of the variety that is among us. Let's see if I can get the, okay. And then here are reasons for immigrating. The Vietnamese overwhelmingly said they came because of a war in politics or in search of freedom. The Filipinos overwhelmingly came for jobs. They were trained in American-based nursing schools. 66% of all Filipinos in Houston are women, right? And so it's a big part of what. And then Chinese and Pakistan and Indians came primarily a combination of economic reasons and education. The story about the Chinese is, of course, they came here as graduate students and then figured out a way to stay. And you've got, again, this variety that reminds us of the tremendous variation. Here's one other variation to remind us of. This is religious preferences. We have become in the city not just a microcosm of the world's peoples, but also a microcosm of the world's religions. And in our surveys, just a random sample of all of us, a tripling in the number of Buddhists, Muslims, and Hindus in America, or in Houston. And you can see Filipinos are overwhelmingly Catholic. Indians are split between being Hindu or Muslim. The Vietnamese are either Catholics or Buddhist, and the Chinese are Protestant, but also the most likely to claim no religious affiliation. Again, a reminder of the great variety and richness of these communities. And then here are the six different Latino communities. Immigrants from Mexico, there's still 75% of all Latinos come from Mexico. The next largest sending country is, of course, El Salvador. About 13% of Latinos come from El Salvador. Other Central American countries, stunning educational deficits. Relative to the average education, the average American, Latinos from Central America and Mexico are coming with very low levels of education. 50%, 54% do not have high school degrees, but then the Cubans and South Americans come with tremendous credentials, and even more those coming from elsewhere in the world, especially from Europe. So it's again a reminder of the variety, but that picture of so many Latinos not coming with low levels of education and is what creates the anxieties in this country. These are people who are never going to get out of poverty. They're never going to learn English. They are burdens on our society. And we can now contribute to that argument by reporting that we have now reached a large enough number of Latino immigrants that we can ask the question, what happens to Latino immigrants who've been in the United States for 9 years or less, compare them to those who've been here for 10 to 19 years, compare them to Latino immigrants who've been in America for 20 years or longer, and compare those three groups with second-generation Latinos, born in the United States of immigrant parents, and third-generation, born in America of parents, both of whom were also born in the United States. And when you do that, you discover remarkably and absolutely consistently, every measure we have of socioeconomic status shows this progression, right? This is household income greater than $35,000. That's not a lot of money, but it gets you out of poverty. 16% only of the Latinos who've been here for 9 years or less. 22% of those 10 to 19 years. 40% of those have been here for 20 years or longer. 58, 57% of the US born. Do you use a computer in your home or place of business? Do you and your family currently have any health insurance? Do you live in the city of Houston or in the suburbs? Do you own or rent the place where you live? Strikingly, Latino immigrants coming to America with low levels of education are working their way out of poverty, at least as fast as the Italians and the Greeks and the Poles did 100 years ago when the same fears were being expressed about those inhabitants of Little Italy who were never learning English and never succeeding. And when you ask the question of why, what's going on here, I have some good friends who work at the School of Public Health who are studying something they call the Hispanic Paradox. Latina women in the bottom of the socioeconomic status, facing all the terrible stress of abject poverty, coming into the hospitals of Houston and Galveston and giving birth to perfect babies. 100% full-term babies, whereas African-American mothers under similar circumstances often have very serious, large numbers of low birth weight babies with serious problems. The Hispanic paradox, the immigrant paradox, how come? And what I learned from Claudia, who you'll be hearing from in just a moment, is a tradition that the Latino communities have brought with them into America called the cuarentena, which says that a pregnant woman in the last couple of months of pregnancy and the first couple of months after the baby is born, the community provides and surrounds her and says, you have a baby, we'll take care of you. And there's this wonderful tradition that reduces the stress that so many mothers undergo when left to their own devices. And then there's the other argument, the great American story. Who braves the journey? Who makes it across the tremendous number of impediments we put in the way of people who want to come to this country? Only the healthiest, only the most optimistic, only the most committed to hard work, only the most self-confident. And that renewal of the American spirit that has happened with earlier waves of immigration into America is happening today. And then one other just quick question about, are they becoming American? And here's just a few quick indications. This is English language. Did you do the interview in English or in Spanish? A powerful measure of English fluency, right? To sit on the telephone for 20 minutes speaking only English to these complicated questions. 15% of immigrants have been here for 9 years or less. 42% of the immigrants have been here for 20 years or longer. And then of course 85 and 90%. And I tell the Anglos, it's an illusion. You think they're not learning English, they are learning English. We don't see it because you got new immigrants coming all the time. It's hard for adults to learn a new language. You follow Latino immigrant families over time, and they are learning English at least as fast as the Italians and the Greeks and the Poles did. And in fact, I remind people, everybody on this planet is learning English. It is the language of upward mobility and of the global economy. There are more Chinese in China today studying English than there are Americans in the United States studying English. 400 million Chinese are taking English lessons. And I tell Anglos, boy, if we were smart, we wouldn't be asking how come they're not learning English. We'd be asking how come my Anglo kid isn't learning Spanish or Chinese, the two languages that will open the doors to the global marketplace in the 21st century. And we Americans are generally the only actors in the world scene who speak only one language, who know only one culture, and that is not an advantage in the global economy of the 21st century. And then do you think of yourself as primarily Latino or primarily American? Percentage say primarily Latino plummets. Preschool children likely to have problems later in life if both of the parents work. A book that most people disapprove of should be kept out of the public libraries. The U.S. should admit more immigrants in the next 10 years as admitted in the last 10. Nice little stepwise function here. Third generation Latinos are not much different from Anglos and their concerns about immigration today. And then think of your three closest friends in Houston. And we asked a bunch of questions about them, of course, including what is their ethnicity. And the percent who said all three of my closest friends are Latinos drops from 92% to less than half in the third generation. The American genius of taking people from all over the world and turning them into Americans, being changed in the process and enriched by that process that is unfolding today, we have become a city and a nation of immigrants again, after 50 years of no immigration. And it's not surprising again that there's these anxieties about it, but it's also a tremendously important reminder that the fears we have about, we've always in America been unhappy and concerned when large numbers of foreign-born residents were in our midst. We like second and third generation immigrants, right? 100% American kids speaking perfect English with exotic cultures. And we didn't like it when the Irish came, we didn't like it when the Italians and the Greeks came. And there's some of that anxiety today that just is equally misplaced as we watch this new world unfold in the 21st century. And anxiety and antagonism toward illegal immigration is dropping. Here are just some quick examples. Large numbers of undocumented immigrants have been coming to Houston in recent years. How serious a problem do you think that is for the city? The percent saying it's not a very serious problem for Houston. It goes from 43 in 2008 to 51 to 63% in our latest survey. Are you in favor or opposed to granting illegal immigrants a path to legal citizenship if they speak English and have no criminal record? And what are you in favor or opposed to allowing children of undocumented immigrants to become U.S. citizens if they graduated from college and served in the military? The Basic Dream Act, how can you be against the Dream Act? Kids who did everything we asked of them, they came here, they grew up here, they went to college, they served in the military. We ought to figure out a way to let them stay, to not round them up and send them who knows where. And gradually, and this year, we're going to see comprehensive immigration reform take place. And the single most powerful predictor among Anglos of comfort with diversity is age. I just want to show two final things, and then I promise I'll stop. This is a kind of fun question. We said, have you ever been involved in a romantic relationship with someone who is not Anglo? And 58% of the Anglos under the age of 40 said, thank you for asking. Yes, indeed, I have. And then the older you are, the less and less likely that is to be the case. And of course, it's a reminder that us older Anglos grew up in a different world than younger Anglos. And there's that fundamental law of human nature that says what I am familiar with feels right and natural, and what I'm unfamiliar with feels unnatural and somehow not quite right. And it's not surprising, every single question that we ask shows a relationship with age among Anglos. This is 4 different groups of Anglos. By ages, right, Houston's increasing ethnic diversity will become a source of great strength for the city or a growing problem. The percentage say it's a source of great strength, drops from 70 to 53%. The increasing immigration into this country today mostly strengthens American culture or mostly threatens American culture. Percent saying it mostly strengthens American culture. It goes from 60 to 47, 46 to 36% among Anglos over 60. The influx of undocumented immigrants is not a very serious problem for Houston. In favor of granting illegal immigrants a path to legal citizenship. 73, 62, 59, 53. I remind people, us older Anglos can still learn. We can change, 53% of us. But it's a reminder of how radically the world has changed and how younger Anglos are just growing up in a different world than us older Anglos did. And it's a part of being in a time of truly extraordinary transformation. And so this ethnic diversity can be the greatest asset that Houston could have on a whole range of different things. And Claudia's going to remind us of tremendous insights that we can learn from these communities as the cultures of the world all come to Houston, Texas. My example is we have the 2nd largest port in the country in Houston, the 6th largest port in the world. Just because we're 50 miles from the ocean doesn't mean we can't have a port. Well, that port means that Houston's destiny is to be a world center for trade and commerce in the global economy of the 21st century. It's going to be an enormous advantage for Houston to have in positions of economic and political power Black Houstonians, Hispanic Houstonians, Asian Houstonians to build the bridges to the global marketplace. This ethnic transformation can be the greatest asset that Houston could have, or it could tear us apart and become a major liability, reducing rather than enhancing our competitiveness, setting the stage for social conflict, creating a failure to build the educational structures that are going to be needed to ensure that these kids, especially African American, Latino kids, are prepared to succeed in the knowledge economy of the 21st century. This generation and how we respond will be determining the kind of future that Houston, but also America, will have in the 21st century. So it's a remarkable moment, and we're so grateful that Claudia has done this research to just remind us of how much on these other dimensions we have to benefit from this extraordinary moment, unanticipated, a set of cards that this generation has been dealt. No one planned for the oil boom to collapse, for us to recover into a new kind of economy where education becomes so important. No one planned for the demographic transformation to take place. These are the cards that this generation has been dealt. How we play those cards will determine the kind of city, the kind of state, the kind of country that we build together in the 21st century. Thank you all very much, and looking forward to Claudia's remarks. Thank you.
I'm so delighted to be here. And this book, Pat had it exactly right. I was encouraged to go all over the country to basically reiterate the wisdom of about 8 practices that I saw happening here in Houston. This book is really storytelling, and it's what I learned from my fellow Houstonians. And the reason I'm asking you to pass it around is really the beginning and the end are what I learned from Stephen Klineberg. It is no coincidence we are here together, because I was a reporter for many, many years, and we were joking about this earlier, and I habitually called Steve up at 5:59 on weekdays asking for a statistic or an explanation. And this breathless, joyful, compelling storytelling about Houston was what got me fascinated about writing about immigrants here. So I am the beneficiary of an academic teacher of Houston, and then the rest of the book is my other Houston friends, what I've learned from them. It's basically a Valentine to this city, and it's based on stories that I wrote, mainly for the Houston Chronicle or Los Angeles Times, but then learned more about from my friends, because really, this book is about envy. It's about things that my immigrant friends had that I wanted. Now, this sort of envy is not unique to me. It's also not even unique to this generation, this post-1965 array of immigrants who've come here who are doing things that other people are observing. Before this generation of immigrants came, a whole other wave came that, again, transformed my life and everyone here. So the Germans came to this country, and in every clearing they settled, they got their houses, they got a roof over their heads, and then they built kindergartens. So thank you to the Germans that many years ago, they got me into kindergarten in the 20th century. By the same token, there's a lot of talk about disaster preparedness and interaction with our neighbors and the kind of architecture that creates a healthy urban environment. Well, the southern front porch is now being really appreciated. You get to know your neighbors, you're vigilant in your community. That kind of architecture with the big overhanging front porch probably came to us from Africa by way of Haiti, by way of New Orleans. The shotgun houses have those, and that kind of cool outcropping in front of your house really contributed to the southern idea of community that we are all working hard to recreate today. And finally, the Scots-Irish, who heavily populate the great state of Texas, had a million different influences, but among them were a confidence that you did not need to be a member of the elite to have something to say in the running of our democracy, and also a passion and a real living in the wilderness, a coexisting with animals and hunting, and the actual garb that the Indians wore. The Scots-Irish fought the Indians, vanquished them, because Scots-Irish were the ones that were pushed out into the interior of this country, but they did it by learning and watching closely Native American traditions, and in some ways, they are the way those traditions have been passed into the non-Native American culture. So the idea of copying the incredibly smart, useful practices of the neighbors is American. That is American tradition. So I'm going to tell you about 3 practices that I saw from my friends and I copied that worked for me. These practices, all of them were in Houston, and you do not need to grow up in these cultures to appreciate them or use them, because they are portable, but also they work to achieve goals that we really want. They translate beautifully. There are many practices that have no relevance in this culture or are actually abhorrent to this culture. And in fact, many immigrants who come here, they're happy to leave some of those practices and some of those values behind, but they come here because they value what we have. And so there is this interaction here. I'm going to tell you about 3 of them, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. And how does that work exactly? The first one is a healthcare practice that Steve referred to, la cuarentena, and that sounds like 40 in Spanish. It sounds like quarantine. This is an ancient pre-Columbian practice that really most people on Earth have some form of, much less so in North America for some immigration historical reasons, but the people who are really hardcore about it in the United States tend to be rural Mexican immigrants. And this is how a cuarentena works. For 40 days after a baby is born, the resources, the one chicken, the good hammock or bed, all go to the mother. The baby is cuddled, cleaned, and taken care of, but all the resources go to the health, the physical and mental health of the mother. Now, these are not traditionally feminist cultures. I did a lot of this research in Akron, Ohio, and the people I talked to were recently arrived Mayans from Chiapas. These women worked so hard. They really had extremely difficult lives. Chiapas also has the highest infant mortality in Mexico. That is why, actually, so very, very much attention is given to women, because infant mortality is one of those tragedies of poverty that people steel themselves for, but the loss of a mother is a catastrophe for an entire family and even community. So the chicken is killed. The mother gets something called atole, which is a kind of a toasted corn gruel that is quite delicious. You can get it at the Guadalupana Cafe in Montrose. It also is extremely high in absorbable iron and carbohydrates. It's got a raw form of sugar in it that give energy, that does not too quick a blast of energy, and it keeps a mother hydrated all day long. The other thing about atole, which is considered a kind of a miracle food, and the Mayans traditionally worshipped maize as their cultural lifeblood. You can't just pop atole in the microwave and leave it in a cooler and then go on. It really needs to be slowly reheated. And if your tradition requires that mom needs to have atole every couple hours, someone is there for her. So this is a really symbolic tradition. It's nourishment, it's physical nourishment, but somebody is there. And in the cuarentena, the mother is rarely left alone. She's not pestered, but she is supposed to, she only has a couple jobs: rest, learn how to breastfeed with guidance, and bond with her baby. And although the research is limited, what we do know, and anecdotally, there's pretty strong evidence that in many traditional communities, postpartum depression is unknown. Life is very, very hard. There's so much tragedy associated with childbirth in very poor places. But in places like Chiapas, there's not even really an expression for postpartum depression. They're familiar with postpartum psychosis, which is very rare, but folk doctors know about that. They know that after a few days, you're going to have the baby blues. But postpartum depression, which we have in this country at about 15%, or perhaps more, is really not part of life there. And we don't quite know what is behind postpartum depression. But we lose millions and millions of dollars, millions and millions of hours of productivity and healthy, secure parenting to this plague, really, in a society with the best medical system on earth. And we do know a few things about postpartum depression. The risk factors include previous depression. Somebody who knows you and is monitoring you closely might be able to watch for that and maybe compensate for that. But also lack of rest, isolation, dislocation from loved ones, poor relationships, conflictive relationships with spouse or parent. So this is not rocket science. If you can eliminate some of these stressors, if you can reduce postpartum depression, you can create a buffer, and this can have extraordinary outcomes, not just for the mother, but for the health of the baby. So it's a lovely tradition. If you talk to a factory worker from Chiapas who's now in Akron, Ohio, and you ask, what were those first 6 weeks like after a baby? She'll say, well, a little boring, but mainly just so restful. Okay, I think that there is something for the rest of us to learn here. And not only as a charming tradition, but we really don't have a good system for postpartum care in this country. And this is one of those practices that the poorest of the poor bring because they must take care of themselves, that I think has a place at this moment in our healthcare system. So that's the first one. The second one is an educational practice of Asians that come to this country. And again, as Steve was saying, it's a big mistake to fall into that model minority trap. Really, Asians do extremely well as an overall group in American public schools, but again, Asians come here with high economic and high educational levels overall. Those who come here from very depressed backgrounds or uneducated backgrounds have a harder time navigating both our economy and our educational system. That's exactly how it works for Americans too. However, Asians from the big Asian countries, including South Korea, come here from societies where getting into that tiny handful of reputable colleges really is the only form of social mobility outside of having some connections or already having arrived economically. It is desperately, desperately important to try to get your kid into one of these schools. And The extremes that people go to, as you know, are nightmarish. We would never want to have to do in this country where we have lots and lots of good universities. That's not our problem. However, the South Koreans who come here have a toolbox of how to navigate an educational system, how to survive a system when it's a matter of life or death. We don't need to be that intense about it, but we can pluck some of those tools because they work so well. And one of them is called the Hagwon, and that's a Korean word for study place. And it's after school schooling, often it's tutoring, but more often it's actually small private classes. In the United States, immigrants who in Los Angeles who are working as hostesses in restaurants, they still haven't found their sea legs in this country, nevertheless are investing a lot of money in high quality after schooling. And it's not even necessary to do it every day. The attitude, however, is radically different from the American idea of after school. The attitude is not getting tutoring because Junior or Janie has already flunked out, is already behind, is already causing problems. It's preemptive. The idea is that you prepare your child ahead of time. So that kid is a few steps ahead in school, in math. And in my book, I mentioned that I was at a thrift shop with a teacher, a Houston teacher, and she was there buying treats for her kids, rewards out of her own dime, out of her own pocket, so many of our teachers do. She was doing everything she could to help her kids get ahead. And nevertheless, she did say to me, "I think the Asian kids are more intelligent." And I said, well, how can you possibly say that? Well, she said, well, I know it because whenever I introduce a new concept to my 4th grade math class, it's as if the Asian kids have already known it. Well, they do already know it. They learned it 6 months before in Hagwon or with small groups or tutoring groups. And this does not have to be expensive. Because I'm envious of my immigrant friends, began to copy this. And my little girls study math with a teacher in Kerala, South India, for about $15 an hour through Skype. And they are, they may or may not be math geniuses, but they're always 6 months ahead because the teacher has done what I could not do, which is crack the HISD website and figure out the curriculum 6 months in advance. I noodled around. I was overwhelmed by the website. This is life or death in India and Korea and China. She figured it out, and she made it her business to always have them a few steps ahead. And listen, they're 8, okay? I can't promise what kind of outcomes this will have, but I can tell you everything is a little familiar to them. They don't need the extra help, which frankly, their genetic heritage might suggest they would need, okay? They don't need it. And they're very confident. They have a feeling of entitlement to being good at math that as I tutored Vietnamese kids and Chinese kids, and they would sometimes say to me, well, I've got to be good in math. I'm Chinese, or I have to be good at this. I'm Indian, which is a complete non sequitur, but it's a good non sequitur, and I want my kids to adopt that too, that sense of entitlement to be good at something which comes from some preparatory work. But I also want to stress that we have no need or wish to copy the level of intensity and hysteria in South Korea and China. And in fact, there is good research that suggests that many South Koreans now come here to escape that. This is nothing we want, but we, like so many of these things, we can adapt it from societies where these were life or death strategies, cherry pick them, and use them in this society to enhance the way we live. And the final one I want to tell you about is really little known, and I discovered this and really explored here in Houston, which has to do with our extremely educated Nigerian population. We've got a lot of people from the Igbo community here in Houston, and they have an extraordinary system that they don't talk a lot about to outsiders called Orbas. It's spelled O-G-B-O, and there's a beautiful book that you can get on Amazon for about $1. It's a photo book called Ogbo, or Orba, Life in a Nigerian Village. There's a photo essay of these clubs actually taking place. So these are basically civic engagement clubs. And Nigerians like to say that, the Igbo have a saying, every man is a prince. They're a little bit like Texans. They just don't take well to being bossed. And this is why I think this particular form of civic engagement has such potential for Houston, which, as we know, is the most philanthropic city in the United States. Again, not because anyone is bossing us, but because that is our nature. And Houstonians give the way we feel like giving. And I think that there's a natural harmony between some of the goals and values of the Igbo in Houston and Houstonians themselves. This is how an Orba works. You're born into it. You don't sign up. You don't fill out any papers. You are not conscious when you are born into your Orba. It's also called an age grade. So you're in your village, you're 0 years old, and you are part of a fraternity that you will be, or sorority, you will be in forever and ever. And then when you're around 3 years old, your mom or your grandmother might say, yeah, those are your age grade mates, or your age mates. And you think, well, whatever. And then when you're around 7 or 8, and this is happening to this day, and many of the Nigerian architects and engineers in Houston are part of this. When you're around 7, it's time for all the kids in your Orba, rich and poor. And this book really shows an extraordinary range of kids, a kid, in a European soccer jersey and a kid with nothing but underpants on. And they are all out there sweeping the village square, because that's what a 7-year-old does. And you don't want to be the only 7-year-old who's not out there playing and singing and sweeping the community square. When you get to 15, you might be clearing out the stream where people do the wash. When the boys are 17, they are actually building huts for the indigent and for widows. And when they're around 21, the young men actually guard the village. And one would think, oh, well, this could get out of control. But from the research I've done, really it's a very nice system, because these young men are itching to do something. It's a gerontocracy, which means the older people are running things really until they die. And it's a very restless situation for young people. The defense of their village is an incredibly important role. And it's also a channeling of their energies while they're waiting and waiting and waiting to become the leaders. And everyone's entitled to be a king in the gerontocracy, right? And so there's this feeling that I will do my bit now and participate in my age grade, because leadership is waiting for me as soon as I get older. There's also a really interesting principle in these age grades that it's not charity. It's just being human. There are certain things you do to be socialized. And you are doing it because you will receive these services yourself. So this is a concept that Steve pointed out to me about 2 years ago, reciprocity. It's very, very different from charity, and it's much more nourishing, and it's a badge of membership in the human race. I'm stepping up to give, and I expect to receive. And I will really give of myself something difficult and time-consuming, and I won't be ashamed to get it back one day too. So in Houston today, there are age grades that create clinics in their countries. Roads, a lot of the infrastructure in Igbo land, which does not have a very functional government, is created by these age grades. The other piece of it that I think has great application in Houston is that the real motive, the thing that keeps people going and going and gathering and doing these services, either physically and practically or sending money home, is competition. The real reason people stay on age grades is because they want to destroy the age grade behind them or ahead of them. And I talked to a criminologist. He was a chair of a department in Atlanta, and the proudest moment of his life was not, coming to a new country, becoming the chair of a department, making it here. He was part of the age grade that brought an electrical generator to his village and physically installed it. He will never forget that, and the joy of that, the communal joy of that, was actually more enriching to him than any personal achievement, because he got to share it. He enjoyed it with other people, and there was a feeling our football team won because the age grade behind him has never, ever achieved such a triumph. So I just want to throw out there this idea that while Houston's incredibly philanthropic, there are some strategies to up our game that our own Igbo residents are doing all the time. And to wrap this up, this is how you find out about these practices and how they might apply to us, how they might increase our buffer from postpartum depression, maybe improve our healthcare policies, or inject energy into our public school systems by having middle-class kids in those school systems thriving and challenged, or even perfecting our already really good standard of philanthropy in the city. Just ask. Just ask. My book is based on one question. What's the smartest thing that people do in your country that you shouldn't forget and Americans should copy? It's called The Question. And you will be amazed. Everybody's got an answer. Everybody's got an answer. And I'm a nosy reporter, and so the bar's rather low for me, but in my experience, no one has ever minded my asking. So I suggest asking that question. What's the smartest thing that people in your country do that you shouldn't forget and the rest of us should copy? That's what I got. Thank you.
Good evening. That was a wonderful presentation. Appreciate you for that. My name is Rocco Narvios. I'm with an organization here called Stay Diverse. We promote multiculturalism here in the city. And with the immigrant advantage, keeping that in mind, are there any resources online or something that we may be able to have access with, something that we be able to take a look at the different organizations of the immigrants here in Houston and the different organizational leaders, so that way we can reach out to them and further their understanding with us, so that way we can flourish together as a city?
There are lots of associations and organizations. One of the jokes in Houston is, of course, whenever any three Asians get together, they form an association. Yeah, I mean, and that's what it means to be in a city that is so diverse now. That I don't know, where is there any one place that
like a list,
yeah, that's a good
designated list.
It's a great question, and as a folklorist who does all of her work by asking, people say to me, "Where did you find that person? How did you locate someone who sings Cantonese lullabies?" You ask. But what I will say is there are lots of lists, but they're not unified. But the great wonder and resource of our world is the internet, and the internet really does. Every community I work with has access and posts itself on the internet, sometimes in Igbo, sometimes in Spanish, sometimes in Cantonese, but I'm afraid there are no unified lists that I know of.
Would you like a couple of very useful starting points? Would that help you?
Sure.
Okay. Again, it's a galaxy, but I would say Benito Juarez, who worked with the city and I think is still affiliated as the immigrant point guy. Neighborhood Centers, Inc. in Gulfton, which is the biggest nonprofit in Houston and operates from the same principle of what works, what's functional, and they have an extraordinarily diverse community, and so they can help you to agencies. Alliance for Multicultural Alliance?
There are numerous refugee organizations, and the Alliance is one of them. And Interfaith Ministries.
And there's a new, isn't there, Manetta, the Mayor's Council on Immigration and Refugees, and Masira, and that's been changed to something else, but it's there. The mayor, at the mayor's office, an effort to reach out to all the different organizations. And now it's Department of Neighborhoods. That's right.
Well, appreciate that. Anything that we can do to unify those lists, so that way it'd be a lot easier for us to access. Maybe we can collaborate.
Hello. Thank you for the wonderful talks, and the topics are so interesting, but I have a question about the methodology for Dr. Klineberg, because your survey is about 20 minutes of questions, yes?
Yes.
Over the phone, typically.
Yes.
And are people answering their phones?
Right.
All of us who look at who's calling and then don't pick up a strange number.
Yeah.
And if people are or aren't, does that skew your sampling?
That's a great question. When we first started in the 80s, everybody had landlines. Everybody answered the telephone. There were none of these horrible things like caller ID and answering machines. So now it's much more difficult. And our difficulty is getting someone to answer the telephone. If they answer the phone, the cooperation rate is as good as it's ever been almost. I mean, you say, why are you calling? Well, we're doing our 30th annual survey. And how'd you get my number? We have a computer that gives us random phone numbers. We don't know who you are or where you live, but your views are really important to us. It's a short, interesting questionnaire. The Houston Chronicle will be carrying front page stories in a couple of months, and we won't you participate? And almost always people say, all right, what do you want to know? And then never almost do they break it off, even if it's 20 minutes, because it becomes clear it's a really legitimate survey. So it's tough, and it's getting tougher. And we now do 30% of the phones are cell phones, and 70% are landline. Now we're going to 35-65. You can get random phone numbers that serve cell phones. And then we weight the data at the end, because you always, no matter what you do, will oversample older Anglos and undersample younger Latinos. So it gets weighted, and it seems to be still working. And I figure I'm going to retire before the whole thing totally collapses.
Hi, I've got a question about maybe some of the challenges in Houston. If you look at some of the cities that had early 20th century new immigrant populations, I think what's really wonderful in some of those cities is the original communities that they settled are still there. So in Chicago, for example, the Ukrainian communities, the Ukrainians who have moved out into the suburbs after 5 generations, they still go back to what they call Yuki Village on Sunday morning, where all their churches are, and et cetera, et cetera. We're really pleased about how Houston is evolving so quickly. What are the challenges here?
So, which question are you asking? What are the challenges? Will there remain these sort of neighborhood communities over the longer haul?
Challenges that maybe we're seeing in Houston.
Yeah, I think certainly one of them is that Houston has never been a city of immigrants before. We've been a city of migrants, Anglo migrants pouring into Houston forever. Suddenly, we're a city of immigrants, and that's a new thing, unlike Chicago or Los Angeles or New York that has those traditions. So it's, I think, particularly interesting and challenging, and also exciting, because it's all at once. Here is everybody.
There's another challenge too that is national, but I think is particularly pronounced in Houston, which is the immigrant health paradox. There are 2 pieces to that paradox. One is, why are very poor people living an average of 3 years longer than Americans, having healthier babies and lower incidence of mental health problems? On the other hand, their kids have lower longevity. Their kids have much more risk-taking behavior. Their kids have way, way higher obesity, asthma, diabetes. Even for first-generation immigrants, the longer they stay here, the more their health deteriorates, in even their longevity prospects. That's really serious. We know the reason why. Their habits, they're becoming Americanized. It's, as Steve was saying, that the Americanization process is not a problem anymore.
Better or worse.
Yeah, but it is posing really very serious health challenges.
Question here.
2 more questions. Question is to Professor Stephen, is that how the African American community maintain their percent throughout the years, that having the same percent, they like regarding the other populations or the other groups, like their percent is almost the same throughout the years. Why? What is the reason that
On that chart of the
charts, yeah,
that shows the African American community staying exactly the same, about 20%.
Like 90%, 20%, 90%, 20%, while the other groups like change throughout the years. So what is the reason? How they would be able to keep that percent the same?
So the percent is growing, of course. The total population of Harris County is increasing by about 20% each decade. And so all that chart tells you is that the African American population is growing at about 20% per decade. So it's staying at the same level, whereas the Anglo population is actually dropping, and the Latino and Asian populations are growing by 70% and 40%, right? So it's not like that the African American population has stopped growing, it's growing at a solid pace. This is the most rapidly growing major city in the country, and the most ethnically diverse. I mean, it's all, here we are, oh my God, what happened? Why is this happening in Houston? Well, it is.
But
And so
Steve,
that's-
may I ask though, because I've had this question and I've assumed the answer, but you need to clarify it, I think, because I think it speaks to your question. Am I right in thinking that what you deem the African American community is the African and the African American community? Because there definitely is a dynamic going on in Houston where Houston is the home to the largest Nigerian population in the country.
1/2 of all African immigrants are Nigerian.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I love that you mention is the return of African Americans to home places in the South. And I know this well because I grew up in California and worked alongside African Americans who happily returned to Texas in their later years.
Yeah, and it's a part of the dynamic of the city and all the different transformations.
We have one more over here, and then the last question.
I actually have two questions. With the tremendous diversity of ethnic backgrounds and languages, does the city of Houston provide sufficient opportunities for these people to learn English? I was an immigrant myself some years ago, and learning English was a real challenge. So that's the first part of my question. The second question really is, I understand USA Congress has never declared English as the official language of the United States. What is your opinion? Should we have one official language in the country?
Both wonderful questions. We need to do more to help people learn English as rapidly as possible. It is just a mistaken understanding that says these people are not learning English and don't want to learn English. So we've got to enforce a single language on everybody immediately. I think it's healthy that we offer even people who are American citizens and voting an opportunity to read these very complicated propositions we have to vote on in their native languages and in Spanish, even though they speak English. I think it makes, whereas if we had English as an official language, that would be verboten, right? And so I'm on a soapbox to say it's a mistaken fear that the people are not learning English. Everybody is learning English. And we need to help people learn English as rapidly as possible. But the worst thing we could do for Latino immigrants is to stop them from also learning Spanish. And the great advantage is being bilingual. And we need to pick up on that. And I would love to see HISD require every single child to be fluent in both English and Spanish before they graduate from high school. It'd be one of the greatest things you could do. We're not ready to do that yet. We still think English is the most important, but equally important now is to be comfortable in more than one language and more than one culture.
We have one last question before we wrap it up.
It's so great to hear Houston's story from a professor, a journalist / author, and a folklorist. Thank you so much for that today. But what if we aren't those things? What if by training we're something else? And we want to tell those stories. I've lived in Houston now for a decade. It's been an exciting decade to live here and see the changes from your study, Dr. Klineberg. I'm a citizen, born and raised, and the daughter of immigrants. And I see these stories every day in Houston. I would love to tell them. How would you suggest to the layperson to tell these stories?
Well, goodness. That is sort of my stock and trade. But actually, I'm up here on the dais with two people who tell those stories in their own ways. Dr. Klineberg collects a whole lot of numbers, but he turns those numbers into narratives. And Claudia is an amazing journalist who was wise enough to really grasp the importance of a beat called immigrant life in this city. And I got to do it because I trained as a folklorist and chose to become a public folklorist. But I think all of us can sort of find ways in the work we do to tell those stories either by blogging or by writing or by reaching out to programs and activities and events that we think represent the kinds of stories and learning alongside and helping alongside. That would be my take.
I I think that's a brilliant question, and I didn't have an answer to it until this second when I heard the question. But two things. First, I just want to say that instinct is not only a human instinct that we want to pass on stories, but there's more and more in public health and in mental health. The power of the story has actual clinical applications. We need to tell stories. There's tons of research. I think it's a great idea, and I think actually something more organized could come to be. I think the city of Houston could do a great job of creating a website, tell your stories, your health stories, your arrival stories, which are like people's, birth and delivery stories. I mean, and it would be easy peasy to do. They would be accessible to anybody, and it could be a signature of Houston to have one website with our stories.
Yeah, and one of the exciting things is what's happening with opera, recognizing that opera is stories put to music, and so this tremendous refuge, and now the mariachi opera that is coming, and the woman who wrote the stories, that captured the stories for Refuge, is Leah Lax, and is in the process of publishing a book that captures many of those same stories. That's one of the great things about being here now in this remarkable city of ours at this remarkable moment in Houston's history.
We want to thank you all so much. I'd like to invite up a woman that I tried to introduce earlier, but she wasn't in the room. Just to take us out, Sabrina Motley, the Director of Programs here at Asia Society.
I want to thank you all so much for coming. As Asia Society opens its doors, we want to tell all sorts of stories, not just from Asia, but really the stories that live here in Houston. With these fine people and people like yourselves, we're able to do that. This has been an exciting first year for us. We're planting seeds. And again, I want to thank our panelists, Pat, Claudia, Stephen. Would you please join me in thanking them for sharing stories?